Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this another episode of Your Market Navigator. हम सबको मालूम है कि बजट इज राउंड द कॉर्नर ऑन 1st of February, जस्ट नेक्स्ट मंडे, एंड लोगों के काफ़ी एक्सपेक्टेशंस है बजट को लेके, क्योंकि 2021 में हम लोगों ने जो सिचुएशन देखी है और गवर्नमेंट का एक रिस्पांस देखा है, एक फिस्कल रिस्पांस देखा है टू हैंडल दिस क्राइसिस, उसके चलते काफ़ी एक्सपेक्टेशंस है लोगों के। तो ये टॉपिक को मद्देनजर रखते हुए हम लोग ने इस बार हमारे जो इकोनॉमिस्ट है और फंड मैनेजर है भूपेश, वो जुड़े हुए हमारे साथ इस बार, और वो हमको अवगत कराएंगे हमारे जो व्यूज है रिगार्डिंग मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स एंड बजट एक्सपेक्टेशंस। तो भूपेश ने एक स्पेसिफिक प्रेजेंटेशन सिर्फ एक मार्केट नेविगेटर सीरीज के लिए प्रिपेयर किया हुआ है। तो पहले हमको he will take us through this presentation for next 20-25 minutes और maybe 30 minutes, एंड उसके बाद आपके जो भी कुछ क्वेश्चंस है तो प्लीज आप Q&A सेक्शन में पोस्ट करते जाइए, और हमारा ये अटेम्प्ट रहेगा कि रिमेनिंग हाफ ऑफ दिस कॉन्वर्सेशन के अंदर हम आपके जो भी क्वेश्चंस है उसका जवाब दें। बिफोर आई हैंड इट ओवर टू भूपेश, लेट मी जस्ट वेरी briefly give you introduction of Bhupesh. So Bhupesh has a very rich experience in the field of domestic and global research. He has a rich experience for spanning over 11 years now. And हमारे बिरला आदित्य बिरला सन लाइफ म्यूचुअल फंड के साथ वो पिछले 3 साल से जुड़े हुए हैं। उनके व्यूज आपने काफी हमारे कम्युनिकेशंस के अंदर देखे होंगे। मतलब हमारा जो 2021 कैलेंडर ईयर के लिए हम लोग ने एक प्रेजेंटेशन पुटअप किया था, शायद शेयर किया था, शायद आप लोगों ने देखा होगा। तो ये सब के ऊपर भूपेश के फिंगरप्रिंट्स रहते हैं। सो वेरी हैप्पी टू हैव यू भूपेश विथ अस ऑन दिस एपिसोड ऑफ योर मार्केट नेविगेटर, and can you please take us through your presentations? Would you like to put it up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Navdeep, and very welcome to everyone who is there in this webinar. So broadly, I mean, we'll break this presentation into 3 parts. First, we will look into what is the global backdrop. Then we'll come to what is the domestic, how India economy is looking like, and third, we will have a look into what's the outlook on budget and how those numbers are looking. Beginning with the global macro, just to, have a short recap. So 2019, we had this big COVID crisis, the beginning of the COVID crisis, and that resulted in a sharp downturn in growth in last year. We had the worst recession on record since World War II, and also the broadest recession in terms of the number of economies which were in recession. That was the highest number that we have ever had since the data is available. That is in 1870. So very deep recession. However, good news, number one, we are already seeing a big sharp recovery in growth numbers. We had the worst sometime in April, May, when this pandemic had the biggest fear on policymakers, and we had widespread lockdowns across the world. But immediately after that, we started seeing this sharp recovery in most growth indicators. If you look at the global PMIs, which is a good data set to look into to have a good global picture, we had this sharp downtick, which is the worst downtick that we've ever seen, and then a very sharp recovery. Now, one difference that we had this time compared to earlier recession, particularly the global financial crisis, was that this time, given the nature of the recession because of the pandemic, we had a sharp downturn in the services sector, while manufacturing did somewhat better. And even now, as most of the global economy has recovered towards pre-COVID levels, what we are seeing is that services still lagging the manufacturing. Particularly in what we are seeing in European Union, where we are seeing a very brutal second wave of pandemic, and that is causing the services to lag. However, good news. The first was that we had the sharp recovery. Second good news is that the impact of pandemic is waning. So if you look into this left chart, this basically shows how global activity has moved along with pandemic. So if you see in the beginning, when we knew very little about the virus, at the time when the new cases were quite low, we had this sharp downturn in growth in global activity indicators. But after that, even now with this sharp pickup in cases across the world, we are seeing a very minute impact of that pandemic in terms of actual global activity. So the impact of number one, the impact of pandemic is waning. Number two, we are seeing a big pickup in vaccination across the world. It is right now being led by DM, but I think the vaccine pipeline is very strong and very likely to spread across the world. This is an outlook from Word Judgment. They do this surveys, and it says that majority of them believe that by second quarter, a large number of vulnerable population, especially in DMs, will be getting vaccinated. Another positive news is that this pandemic has a very negative correlation with temperature. And as we are moving from the peak of winter towards spring, that is also a positive thing. That so temperature are rising, pandemic impact is waning, and vaccination is picking up. Third good news, fiscal stimulus is, what actually happened post the global financial crisis was that immediately when the recovery started picking up, there was a sharp fiscal contraction, because at that time the prevailing theme was that doing too much fiscal for a prolonged time is going to have a lot of repercussions on inflation, on financial stability, and all those things. But this time the learning, so recently we had a statement coming from OECD chief economist, which says that this sharp fiscal contraction that we had immediately after the pandemic was a mistake. Even Fed is saying that, you see IMF almost exhorting policymakers to go out and do more fiscal. ECB is telling policymakers to continue with the fiscal. President Biden has come up with a strong fiscal plan. If you look here, right side bottom chart, what we see is that there's a widespread bipartisan support across the even the public, even the voters, that the stimulus should continue. Secondly, if you look in the top, this shows how interest rates have moved along with GDP growth. So basically, if this number is negative, it means that interest rates are lower than the real GDP growth rate, which means that debt sustainability is not an issue. So this also means that this extraordinary stimulus that was started in 2020 is likely to continue. And this time, this will continue the recovering economy. Last year, we had this recession, but this time, this will continue the recovering economy. Fourth good news, even the monetary stimulus is likely to continue and well into the future. So just look into this one. This is the Fed forecast of how they see rates and growth. Now, for the next 3 years, they expect growth to be above the longer term growth rate. But despite that, they expect rates to be near zero for the next 3 years. It's a very prolonged long-term guidance from Fed that rates are going to remain very low in the prolonged future. And look, what the markets are factoring in. Markets are also believing the Fed. They also believe, we have this data till December 22. This is a market-based pricing of what the Fed funds rate will be. And most of the market participants believe that Fed funds rate will remain closer to 0%, at least in December 22. So despite recovering economy, despite strong fiscal stimulus, both Fed and the market believe that rates are going to remain very low. We continue to see a big pickup in asset purchases from the central banks, from the G4 central banks. Just to give you a perspective, in GFC, the total asset purchase was about 7% of the GDP. This time, this is going to be 29% of the GDP. So it's a big fiscal stimulus that already is playing out and complemented strongly by a big monetary stimulus as well. Go to number 5. The result of all this stimulus has been that we saw very limited scarring in world economy. This left side is very interesting. This basically shows that in most months of the pandemic, the actual income of an average household in US actually increased. Why? Because the transfer from the government more than compensated for the loss in income. So through the pandemic, most households were richer in terms of income compared to the pre-pandemic level because of the exorbitant transfers. We can see a similar reflection of that in what's happening in the bankruptcies thing. And actual bankruptcies actually fell through the pandemic. Both these factors just reflect the enormity of the both fiscal and monetary stimulus that was done. Go to number 6. There has been a big rise in savings across the world in 2020. We have data from US, we have data from Eurozone. India data suggests the same, that there has been a big pickup in personal savings. Just to give you a number, in US, since the beginning of pandemic till November, till we have data, the excess savings over what is the normal level of savings in US was $1.4 trillion. And this number is likely to increase towards $2 trillion by March, April if the Biden plans goes through. It's a huge amount of money. $2 trillion is like 10% of US economy. That is excess saving of these households. And the saving was basically done because one, we had lockdown, you can't spend money. Second, because the precautionary motive, you don't know how the pandemic will pan out. And thirdly, you were sitting at home and government was transferring money to you. Now, once the economy reopens, which we expect towards spring and all, I think this huge wall of saving is likely to go towards spending. Maybe some of it may be saved because it takes some time for things to normalize, but still it's a huge amount of money which is going to come to the economy. Net, what we are seeing is a sharp V-shaped recovery in global economy. The Bloomberg consensus number for growth in 2021 is 5.2%. I think our own expectation is that this number is going to be somewhere between maybe 6.5% to 7%. So we are seeing a very sharp recovery in global growth. And if you just compare, this line shows what was the trend GDP growth pre-pandemic, and this line shows how things is likely to evolve post the pandemic. And we see that sometime towards second quarter of this year, the actual global growth will surpass the level of which we had in the pre-pandemic time. The key reason for that, simply recovering economy, and amidst that recovering economy, a massive dose of fiscal and monetary stimulus. The key risk to watch out for. So I think the biggest risk, there are two key risks which I like to point out. One is the pandemic itself, and second is that this exorbitant spending, both monetary and fiscal, can have some inflation implication. We're not sure of that as of yet. Last 30 years, predicting inflation had been a losing game. I mean, people have been predicting about inflation, but it never came. The disinflationary forces are very intense, so we're not sure whether this will happen or not, but this is one key risk that we should watch out for. Coming to India, similar story in India. We see a strong snapback and recovery. We are very bullish on India's economic rebound. We believe that we have consistently been more bullish than the market in terms of Indian recovery. So currently for FY21, the market consensus growth is minus 8.5. Reserve Bank is around 7% odd number, and our number is closer to 6%. For next year, we expect a strong recovery towards 13% YoY growth against the consensus of 9.2%. If you look into high frequency data, we are already seeing that most high frequency indicators have already moved back to pre-pandemic levels. So why are we so bullish on India? Number one, the same story. The pandemic has weakened significantly. So if you look into the daily new cases and the daily new deaths, they are a very small fraction of what we had in the peak. For last many months, what we are seeing is that the new cases are falling, steadily falling. And on top of that, the antibody prevalence in studies in many parts of the country shows that a lot of Indian population already got, maybe has already been infected, and so thus have natural immunity. Now, this data has important implication for two more reasons. One, a lot of people were forecasting that come November, December, we will have the festival season, the New Year, the winter season, and therefore we'll have a second wave like we had in many Western economies. That didn't play out. And second, if you do a cross-country comparison of the impact of virus in terms of death rate, in terms of infection rate, our country had one of the lowest levels of this infection rate if you do a cross-country comparison. So the pandemic has already weakened significantly. On top of that, we are now already also beginning to have a vaccination drive, which should also again have a positive impact on growth. A second thing, we had an extraordinary monetary accommodation by RBI. I mean, this was they were in the forefront, betting aggressively to ensure that the negative impact of pandemic is weakened as much as possible. So while globally we had a combination of fiscal and monetary, in India, RBI was doing most of the heavy hitting. Just to give some indication about the aggression. So sometime around early 2019, the policy rate was little above 6.5, I think around 6.5%. And that has come down, effective policy rate has come down to 3.35%. So we have seen a 300 basis point cut in policy rates in a matter of 2 years. Now, we would have seen some of the impact in 2020 itself, but the pandemic came. So this part of this aggressive rate cut was not reflecting in the actual economy. But now, when the economy opens up, this and the aggression which was done by RBI in 2020, both should combine to have an impact on the economy. We can see that in how the 3-month T-bill is paying has moved from 7% odd in 2018 to around just about 3% now. So it's a massive 400 basis point fall in 3-month T-bills. Now, these two graphs are the most important graph in terms of if you have to judge the impact of monetary policy on economy. The right top one shows the excess banking sector liquidity. And for for most of 2020, what we saw was that the banking system had an extra liquidity of the tune of 6 trillion rupees or more. That's an enormous amount of money. That money, banks are getting only around 3.35% or even lower in the reverse repo window. And this is a very big pressure for banks. I mean, every day you are hitting, you are earning only 3.35% in this 6 trillion rupee of excess cash. That's a big force for banks to go out and lend to the wider economy. Second one, if you look here, deposit rates, which is, you can say, the risk-free rate for the normal investor or the normal public, they have fallen significantly, and they're at the lowest level since I have this data. And this is at a time when the deposit growth has picked up somewhat. So banks sitting at too much of money at too low rates, people sitting at too much of deposits at the lowest rate in a very long time. Both these are strong factors, strong push for growth. So typically, what a lot of people forget is that they underestimate the impact that monetary policy can have on India. So they compare with what happened in the DMs. But we should, we should note that in India, the real policy rate has still been quite high. We still have a big high inflation. So there's a lot of scope to drive this rate deep into negative territory. Plus, our debt level has been very low, and therefore we have a lot of scope to leverage more and to benefit from this aggressive monetary easing. We're already seeing the impact. If you look into the weighted average lending rate, they have fallen phenomenally over the last 2 years. Corporate bond yields have fallen phenomenally, and now we are just beginning. Just last 3-4 months, once the worst of lockdown was over, we're also beginning to see the impact of this aggressive monetary easing in terms of pickup in pretty decent sharp pickup in bank credit growth rates. Third reason why we are bullish: one was, just to recount, one was pandemic, second was monetary easing, and third is that for the first, after a long time, we are beginning to see some pickup in housing sector. Key reason number one would be the sharp fall in rates. Interest rates are housing as a sector globally is very sensitive to interest rate. And secondly, for quite some time, the affordability level has been increasing, and added to that, the uncertainty with regard to pandemic, the work from home, and the low rates meant that we are beginning to see a pickup in the housing cycle. So if you see over the last 10 years, a lot of us talk about the investment rate has fallen for quite significantly, but most of the fall in investment rate has been largely because of housing, from 16%. So housing is basically represented in household capex, and from 16% of GDP, it has fallen to 10-11%. Now we expect this to pick up. Housing is also a big generator of employment. It has strong linkages, backward linkages, forward linkages, and so all these combined, a pickup in housing sector should augur very well for growth going ahead. Fourth reason, I think we are quite bullish. We have been quite bullish consistently on India's long-term growth story. There's a lot of negativity has crept in over the last 1-2 years. But if you just look into last 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, India's GDP growth has been incredibly stable, around 6.5%. There is a natural growth. A natural growth rate, given our demographics, is quite strong. I think the key reason for this growth, for this strong growth beyond demographic, would be our distance from the frontier. We are still a very poor economy, we are still an open economy. Therefore, we can quickly adapt high productivity processes and systems from abroad and apply it domestically and benefit from that. Third part why we are quite bullish is that India's credit to private sector, India's overall indebtedness is quite low, and therefore there's a big cash up pending here, which is a big drag for most of the world, because there the leverage has already become very high, and for India this leverage is still quite low. Fifth reason why we are so bullish: there has been a strong policy push coming from the government for the last 2 years at least. We have seen a series of steps. We saw aggressive corporate tax rate cut, which is now closer to global best rates, at least the median global rates. We have also seen a lot of tariff hikes to ensure that the domestic industry is protected. RBI is moving very aggressively to see to it that currency, there's been aggressive currency intervention to see to it that currency remains quite competitive. Both the central bank, both RBI and the government is quite focused to ensure that the borrowing cost remains quite low. Government through its focus on reducing the fiscal deficit. A lot of work has been done on improving ease of doing business. Now you can always complain that this index is not perfect, but no, such a strong fall from 140 or to closer to 60, 50, 55, 60. It shows that even if you discount the intensity of this fall, I think you can not question that the direction has been quite right. And lastly, government, recently they've also announced big PLI scheme, 2 trillion rupees for the next 5 years. And some estimates suggest that it can add closer to 1.7% to India GDP by FY27. sixth reason why we are so bullish is benign external account. Now, what the external account does is that it frees the policymakers and gives them a lot more flexibility to go out and push for growth. For example, if the external account wasn't so benign, RBI would have been quite reticent in coming out with the kind of monetary stimulus that they have given. They have been aggressive pickup in forex reserves. For last 3 years, we are running pretty decent balance of payment surplus. And one advantage of this, what we saw was in this current crisis, and we had the lowest volatility in INR compared to all previous crises, both realized volatility and the average volatility. Both the highest value of the realized volatility and the average value of the volatility. So basically, what this does is that number one was, as I mentioned, that policymakers are freed from this consideration. They can go all out to ensure that they can push for growth. And secondly, it gives a lot of comfort to foreign investors that if the currency is going to be stable, there are going to be a lot more foreign investment into domestic economy than otherwise. So typically, so EMs are generally generally high growth economies, and so India has been, especially if you do a relative comparison. But the real worry for these foreign investors are these macro stability risks. What happens if the currency goes, depreciates sharply? What happens if we have a big rise in inflation? So a lot of these things have, particularly in the external account front, there has been a lot of positive development. In terms of other macro variable, inflation, we expect inflation. Last year we saw a pretty sharp rise in inflation, largely led by food inflation, and I think primarily driven by the fact that we had a lot of disturbances because of, supply side was badly hit because of this COVID pandemic. Going ahead, we believe that this inflation is likely to ease from around 6.5% level, average inflation level in 2020. We expect it to come down to around 4.5% to 5% in CY21. So besides benign external account, this is another key macro stability parameter which we expect to improve this year. Coming to budget, just first let me look at the key budget maths. We expect government to announce a GDP growth of 13.5% YOY compared to minus 4.2% FY21. Gross tax revenue we expect to pick up from 10.2% FY21 to 10.8% this year. This is largely on the back of we are already beginning to see a pretty decent pickup in both direct taxes and indirect taxes, and we expect that to continue in FY22. Just one interesting chart here, a point to note here is that from FY20 to 21, we actually saw a pickup in gross tax to GDP ratio. And the reason why this happened was this here. Government, we all know, did increase excise duty pretty significantly. And that has meant that the excise duty collection has gone up from 1.2% of GDP to 2%. So there's a 0.8% GDP pickup in overall taxes because of excise duty. We believe that there's a good possibility that because prices have gone up significantly and because other taxes have picked up, there's a possibility that at least some part of it may be withdrawn. But overall, combined with some withdrawal of the excise duty and overall pickup in taxes that we are seeing, we expect overall tax GDP ratio to pick up towards 10.8% of GDP. Other key number for market would be what is the divestment numbers. Last year also they had come out with an aggressive 2.1 trillion number. We expect the same thing to happen this time also. Last year it couldn't work because of a pandemic, but I think big ticket items like LIC and all, they would like to push this year. So we see a pretty big number here. Another market moving number is gross market borrowing, which we expect to be at 10.5 trillion rupees, somewhat lower, decently lower compared to FY21. But this is still going to, have some worry in the market because this 13.1 trillion rupee was basically bought by the market, particularly the banks at a time when trade growth was very pathetic and we had abundant liquidity. But now trade growth is picking up, so this 10.5 trillion number is still a decent number. Other key numbers which market looks into will be what is the expenditure growth. We are penciling in a YY growth of 11% this year, which is similar to last year's numbers, wherein we expect the capital expenditure to grow by 25% and revenue expenditure by 9%. Our overall fiscal deficit number is somewhere around 5.5% compared to 6.8% last year and 3.5% numbers in a pre-pandemic era. Just some key tidbits of budget. One, despite repeated breaching, we also expect that this time government is likely to announce a new FRBM target. So FRBM target has seen many revisions and many misses. But despite that, I think what it has done is that it has given a measure of fiscal discipline to the government. And if you look into this dark green to the government of India's fiscal deficit, and if you look into the post FRBM era, the extent of deficit has been significantly lower than the pre-FRBM era. And despite the fact that we had two big crises, one was the global financial crisis, and second one was this current global corona crisis. So despite that, and despite many misses, I think FRBM has done a decent job, and I think there will be there's likely to be another roadmap for FRBM. Now, so media makes a lot of gives a lot of coverage to budget, but we should be quite realistic in our assessment of budget. If we just look into how the budgetary expenditure has been, it has been pretty stable for quite some time. For many decades, it has been quite stable. If you look into the discretionary spending of government, most of the government spending is already tied in terms of interest payment, pays and allowances, pensions, different expenditures, subsidies, and all. And the discretionary level which is available to them is just around a quarter. So there's a very little leeway which government has to spend. The capex spending, which is talked a lot, government will be spending a lot of capex money. It's actually a pretty low level of overall GDP. So even if you are saying the capex growth will be around 25% YOY, the number is still quite low in terms of global, in terms of India's domestic GDP. And within that, so if you just also look into what is the share of government expenditure in overall overall investment, the central government expenditure is only about 5.3%. So while we do expect that government will be coming out with enhanced allocation to capex, I think most of it will have to be off budget. Within the budget, within the fiscal constraints, there isn't much scope for government to come out with a big fiscal allocation. In terms of expenditure, as you can see here, majority of expenditure is interest, subsidies, defense, pension. While a lot of good thing has happened in subsidy, particularly in petroleum subsidy bill still remains quite high. This time we believe that there will be enhanced allocation, number one, to investment. I think investment will be the key theme. The whole DNA of this government has been that we look after supply side and we are outsourcing the demand side to the monetary policy. So I think government will keep on focusing on supply side. I think there will be enhanced allocation to all the physical infrastructure. Somewhat of it will be through capex, right, on budget capex, and a lot of it I think will be through off-budget items. There can be some incentives towards investment. There's a talk about some depreciation benefit. They may incentivize FDI to coming into India, and so government has also come out with this very aggressive 100 trillion rupees of this national infrastructure pipeline for the next 5 years, and a lot of allocation has to be done there because, if I remember correctly, around 39% of overall investment for this national infrastructure pipeline has to be borne by the government of India. And I think some steps can be taken to see to it that big money is channelized towards national infrastructure pipeline. I think most of it will be through off-budget routes, but that is one thing which we can look into. Otherwise, I think there will be enhanced allocation towards health. I don't see towards health and the normal things which the government has been doing, urban infrastructure, roads, railways, aviation, and all those things. There may be some possibility of some relief towards which have been badly hit towards by the pandemic, like aviation, hospitality, but it's very difficult to actually reach the intended beneficiary. So I have some doubt whether it will come, but if it comes, it will be welcome. In terms of tax proposal, there is a possibility. Some people are talking about that there may be some tinkering of taxes, some increase, some short-term increase in taxes. My advice will be not to do this. If you do a cross-country comparison across the world, only Hungary is the only country which is proposing to have a tax hike. So the most across the world, this whole pandemic and the fiscal stimulus has been done without enhancing taxes. And we expect, and advice to the government would be that not to tinker with taxes this time, to ensure that recovery is nurtured. And even if it causes some bit of higher fiscal deficit, given that RBI is so forthcoming, I think that should be pretty okay. Just one another interesting figure. So we talk a lot about deficit has been high, but most of the deficit have been legacy issue over the last in FY 80s and somewhat 90s when we ran very high fiscal deficit, and that has resulted in a big pickup in our interest expenditure. If we just look into the primary deficit, which is the deficit minus interest rate, we have been it has remained over the last 2-3 years. It has remained quite low. So a lot of deficit that we talk about is the legacy issue, and it should be okay for government of India, at least at this time for pandemic, to have somewhat higher deficit. I think market should be quite okay with that.
Yeah, thank you, Bhupesh, for very detailed presentation. Okay, so I've received a few questions from our audience. I request you to kind of keep sharing your questions in Q&A section, and we'll be happy to kind of take them in the for the next 30 minutes or so. So first of all, my first question is on the growth aspect. I mean, through this last 3 quarters or so, we as a house, and you in particular as a person who is kind of at the helm of such forecasting, we have been quite bullish in terms of the growth recovery, both and you have been you have turned out to be right, both in terms of the global growth recovery projections as well as the same for domestic one. So what really led you to kind of forecast these numbers? And even today also kind of you shared that even for global GDP growth for 21 calendar year 21, we expect about 6.5-7, which is easily 1.5% higher than the consensus numbers. So what is, and I know you have kind of taken us through the good news one by one, but if you can just broadly summarize for us key themes which really have led you to believe in such a growth recovery.
Yeah. So there are a few aspects. I mean, why this time this pandemic is, I mean, this recession is different from other recessions. One, this is a exogenous shock. This is a shock which has come from a clearly identifiable reason, which was the virus and the pandemic. Now, quite early in the pandemic, what we could see was that the virus was quite discriminatory in terms of its impact on population. While there was one clear segment, which was people who had comorbidities and who were senior citizens, it was quite brutal on them. But for vast majority of population, which is the younger population and which is economically more active, it was somewhat more like a flu. And so very early in the pandemic, we could sense that given this nature of the virus, how big impact it could have on economy as we go ahead. That was one thing. The virus is not that bad as was earlier being feared. And the data about that started coming pretty early. Second was what we saw, our reading of what happened in the Spanish flu. We saw that immediately after flu, we had a sharp recovery. So you can take this pandemic and this recession of this pandemic as some sort of a natural calamity. But the only difference that in this natural calamity, most of the productive capacity was not destroyed. So we had an exogenous shock. So what typically happens, if you have an endogenous recession, like we had, endogenous means a recession which happens through within the economy causes, like we had this global financial crisis, like we had in early 2000s internet bust. In those times, it is an endogenous recession, and it takes a lot more time for the economy to heal. There are typically excesses, there are deep malaise in different parts of the system, and they take time to recover. But in an exogenous shock, when the shock is over and the productive capacity is not damaged, the propensity to recover can be very sharp. That was one thing. The only thing to worry about was that whether it is going to cause some deep scarring or long-term, what we call hysteresis in economics, that any deep, longer-term impact. And here, the aggressive monetary fiscal stimulus that the governments gave ensured that we don't turn out to have that level of scarring. I mean, in Western governments in particular, I mean, as I just mentioned that for US in particular, the monthly income that you were getting in the pandemic was more than, if you just add the transfer payment, it was more than you had in the non-pandemic year. There was a lot of backstop from the central banks to ensure that bankruptcies didn't happen. So bankruptcies were not happening, people were getting decent income. Once this exogenous shock was getting relieved, we expected that recovery to be sharp. Another point here to note is that when learning that which a lot of policymakers got post GFC was that, so what happened post GFC was that immediately after you had this recovery, everybody started shouting, you have given too much stimulus, we should withdraw it. I mean, OECD used to say, Fed used to say, everybody used to be saying too much stimulus is there, it will cause inflation, it will cause crisis. And therefore, immediately after recovery, we saw a big pickup in bond yields. Fiscal started tightening across the world. This time, the paradigm is entirely different. We have seen the last 10 years, governments kept on giving stimuluses after stimuluses. Central banks kept on purchasing bonds. We had very low rates. we had super tight labor market, but inflation didn't happen. The biggest worry was inflation. So there are basically two major constraints for giving even more stimulus. One is inflation, and second is debt levels. Now, debt level is a very esoteric thing. There is no certainty. I mean, different people have different theories ki how much debt we can afford. So there's no clarity about that. Kitna debt humko chahiye? How much debt is possible? But the proximate cause which can derail a policy stimulus is inflation. And the last 10, 12 years, we didn't have any inflation, which is, to the extent that most policymakers across the developed world are worried that the disinflationary trend is too much entrenched. For example, recently Fed has changed its inflation targeting mechanism. Now they are targeting an average inflation number, which means that for years of low inflation, they will overcompensate it by higher inflation. So now everyone wants to have, Fed wants to have higher inflation to get to a 2% level. In Europe, we have deep disinflation. Japan, we are having deep disinflation or deflation for a very long time. And therefore, policymakers are much more forthcoming to ensure that the fiscal and the monetary stimulus persist. And last year, it happened because of pandemic. And so a lot of it was saved. Now, the same quantum of stimulus, or somewhat lower also, but still a massive quantum of stimulus in a recovering economy can do big things in terms of recovery. And I think policymakers are okay with that. They're okay to marry with the risk. They believe that they have their tools available. If there is an overheating of the economy, they will come and stop it. But till the time it happens, and we don't think it will happen at least in the near term, they are going to ensure that the policy put that we have seen last year, that is going to persist while the pandemic is going to wane. And therefore, we see a sharper recovery.
Okay, interesting. But here is a question, Bhupesh, which I personally have as a professional in the asset management business, and I keep receiving this in one or the other form from our partners also. And the question is this: that over the seen in 2007 or 2008, after GFC, there was a lot of stimulus. This time it is mother of all stimulus. 10% of GDP, etc. And it has kind of led to the savings glut that you just talked about. That the personal income is actually higher than the previous year. The rate of growth or the bankruptcies have actually declined in this recession compared to going up. So with so much of fiscal stimulus, how can there be no side effect? So one is really wondering whether it's liquidity is a panacea, that any natural calamity or the financial crisis can be handled through just pumping in more liquidity. And one one rather fear or sort of risk that most of our people in the community in the asset management business keep talking about is the fact that maybe inflation is the only major risk, and it could actually be a surprise factor. I remember that in 2007-8 also, immediately after the crisis, there was a lot of clamor around this, that there will be side effect of it, and in last 10 years we haven't seen it. And this time it is like a multiplier of that stimulus, both monetary and fiscal put together. So just walk us through what could be the possible risk or the side effect of such a huge stimulus.
Right. So, what is the long-term side effect? That this debt will ultimately have to be paid sometime by future generation, all those things. And second side effect is that if you keep rates low for a very long time, what it happens is that the allocation of capital gets distorted. For example, if those companies which are not productive enough, the so-called zombie companies, they also persist simply because the rates are so low. So the resources of society are transferred toward those companies which should ideally close down and ensure that the resources are transferred to most productive sector of the economy. That is one thing. That we have it is argued that this can potentially have a longer-term dampening effect on growth. That is one big side effect. Second big side effect, I would say, is the more proximate one, as you mentioned clearly, that is inflation. So just to point one more thing in the previous thing. So we have seen a lot of this argument about debt levels and all, about China in particular. So the last 7, 8, 9 years, everybody used to say that China के पास बहुत debt है, वहाँ तो हालत खराब हो जाएगा. China के पास, they have too many debt, it will have a great problem. But it never happens. It never happened. And in this crisis in particular, despite so much debt, they rebounded the fast. In Japan, we have such huge level of public debt, 200% plus of, big government debt. It was supposed to cause some crisis. that crisis did not happen. It may have caused lower growth, but no crisis didn't happen. So what I'm saying is that there is still a lot of, economics is a social science. We don't know the exact answers of questions, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what is the actual negative impact of debt levels, and what is the absolute ceiling of debt that we can entertain. We don't know it. I think it is fair to assume that going ahead there will be some impact, but in the foreseeable future, I don't see any big impact on the debt level per se. And especially in the context that central banks are so forthcoming in ensuring that the cost of this debt is so low. So recently, Janet Yellen made this statement that with rates so low, we should lock in these low rates and go out and spend. So for overall debt level, two things are important. One is what is the growth, and second, what is the interest rate. So now, despite this higher level of debt, because interest rates have been so low, the sustainability issue is not that much. That's one thing. And secondly, hopefully this will we will be seeing some pickup in growth, and therefore these debt levels can be managed. The more proximate worry, I would say, would be on inflation front. I fully agree with you in the worry about inflation, that this enormous amount of monetary fiscal stimulus amidst opening economy can have inflationary implication. And if there's one risk which I'll be worried about, it will be inflation. But having said that, as I mentioned, last 10, 12, 30, 40 years, I mean, people kept on saying inflation aayega, kabhi aaya hi nahi. It is possible that global productivity has increased so much that despite higher demand, which these monetary fiscal policies bring in, the productive capacity of global economy as a whole is sufficient to fulfill this higher demand. But having said that, inflation is one risk which we'll be careful about. But let's see. So what Fed is saying is that पहले भी बहुत बार कहा था inflation आएगा, कभी आया नहीं. Now we'll watch for inflation to actually come. Let it first come and let it go above the threshold for some time, and then we will react. So if that happens, then so what we should be worried about is that कि policy put का पीछे हटेगा, and this will they will step back only when we have a realistic, we have a high inflation for some time at least. I think it's still quite a distance away. As you say, there's a lot of surplus capacity available across the world. So it is not a done deal. But if I have to be worried about one aspect, that will be inflation.
So I hope this, so far we have been talking about inflation, and it's like that old story, or the story that we used to hear. Tiger aaya, and actually when it comes, no one. But hopefully that won't happen. But you're right. I mean, maybe the policymakers are also kind of ready with their policy tools, potentially some more creative and innovative ones, if and when it were to kind of show up.
See, one thing is that, the policy tools available to fight inflation are quite robust. They can increase rate, they can tighten policy and bring in inflation and bring down inflation. Policy tools to fight disinflation are quite rare. They don't have sufficient tools. So this time they want कि एक बार inflation आने ही दो तब देखेंगे.
The only thing is, I mean, we have lots of questions, so I don't want to drag. I mean, I'll take it offline maybe. But one, key concern is what if inflation comes and growth hasn't happened still? Yeah. So that situation will be a bit scary.
That will be worrying. Base case is not that happening in immediate term. It can happen maybe 2022, 2023. But this time, the rebound of the economy and the pent-up demand itself will take us through. So that will be one risk which we'll be careful of next year.
Okay. Fair. So we have a few questions, but before that, I just wanted you to kind of share with our viewers your expectations from budget. Well, kind of you shared the presentation, and 2-3 aspects I particularly thought we'll cover quite a few questions here. One is you talked about capex of about 25% growth. Now, a lot of people are expecting that because of the supply side constraints, maybe government will spend more. So whether the PPP is coming back or there is a substantially higher amount of outlay which will happen towards capital expenditure, or what is going to be the scene on that side. So that's one side of the question which will answer some of the questions we have here. And second is you talked about this excise duty, for example, 1.2 to 2% of GDP this year. And it was a bounty. It can't really go beyond, keep going, definitely not in the next financial year, the same pace of growth. So how do you really see that equation happening? So very, very, in very few lines, if you can just summarize your budget expectations, then we'll take a few questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, the DNA of this government has been that, so for the first time in this regime, I've heard things like we are spending other people's money. There's a very big focus on the government's mind that fiscal rectitude has to be there. Well, I think one learning which they had of why the reason why the previous UPA government lost election was because after GFC they had very big fiscal stimulus, and because of that inflation came, and that was one reason because of which that previous regime lost election. I think this is etched in their mind, and they believe that the key thing for them to maintain is to ensure that inflation remains low. The second thing in their mind is to ensure that the cost of borrowing remains low, because they believe that for India to become competitive, the cost of borrowing should remain low. For both these factors, they have been very focused on fiscal deficit. So even in this year, if you do a cross-country comparison, if we don't compare with DM, if we just compare with EMs also, the level of fiscal stimulus that they have given has been a very small. And even that fiscal stimulus has also been very well targeted. And so at a time when everybody was like splurging money, I mean, for this segment, that segment, this government came out with Atmanirbhar Bharat. It came out with PLI scheme. The focus of the government is very clear that we will look after the supply side, and demand side will be managed by the monetary policy, by the RBI. So even in this budget, we expect more of the same. The focus will remain on the supply side. I think there will likely be higher allocation towards capex. In the pure budget, on budget, within the budget numbers, I think we are seeing only a 5% jump. It can go up to 30% also. But the problem here is that there's the capacity limit about how much money which government departments can spend. So plus they also have the fiscal constraint. So there's a good possibility that they will have off-budget mechanism to ensure that funding goes towards infrastructure projects. I think it will be our base case to see this time that infra investment is likely to be significantly enhanced, even if it is outside the budgetary domain. I mean, pure budgetary government fiscal.
So through PPP mode, or you are saying government could go solo?
I think it will be a combination. It will be through PPP mode also. Plus, I think there's a good possibility that they may spend through PSU, through like NHAI, through HUDCO. There's also some talk going on about having some sort of a vehicle where government will put some equity. That vehicle will take money from the market, and then it will put it into investment. There's also talk going on about DFI also. So some mechanism will be, I think, found out to ensure that more money goes into infrastructure. That will be our base case. Besides that, in terms of pure demand stimulus, I don't think anything big is likely over there. Health will definitely get a bigger focus because of vaccination. Plus, generally, it has been found that the health has seen lower allocation, and therefore that can be enhanced. Education and other segment, I think they are so small proportion. I mean, unfortunately, all these productive thing are very small proportion of government expenditure, and even if it's a big impact, big growth in them, the impact on the economy won't be that high. There may be some incentive which may come for investment. However, there's some talks going on that we may have some higher depreciation benefit to ensure that more investment comes in. There's also some talk about trying to make FDIs easier. Some things can happen on that front. Besides, I think a higher allocation will come through PLI scheme to see to it that manufacturing is boosted.
So you mean to say more sectors in under PLI?
I don't think most sectors. They already have 10 sectors, but allocation will be there. Plus, I think they will also come out with the rules and regulation and give it a real push this time. So more money can come on that front. Otherwise, roads, rail, aviation, urban development, all these segments which have been the government's pet projects, and which are, I mean, big growth enhancers. I think they will continue to get a higher share of government expenditure. In terms of tax mass, I think it is a little difficult. I agree, because fuel prices have gone up, and this time there's a busy election calendar also. So there's a limit to what they can do there. My best estimate would be that there may be some decline in excise duty collection, excise duty rates. Besides that, there is some worry that they can come up with a one-off taxes. My advice, my advice to the government would be that please don't do it. This is going to be very dampening for the economy, and at a time when US is doing such kind of stimuluses, Europe is doing such kind of stimuluses, markets and rating agencies will be okay if India does have some increase in fiscal deficit. So they shouldn't be doing it, but fingers crossed.
Okay. Yeah. Very quickly, we'll just go rapid fire in terms of certain numbers. Okay. Yeah. So you just say numbers, no supporting views on that.
Okay.
So Q3 GDP growth for FY21.
FY21, just above 0%, between 0 to 1%.
0 to 1%. Q4.
3 to 4%.
3 to 4% Q1. Okay. Next financial year, in fact, it's in our outlook, but still.
Yeah, 13%, and I think the upside is to that.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And fiscal deficit for FY21?
FY21 around 7%, little below 7 also possible, but broadly 7%.
7%. Okay. Okay, now I'll just take a few questions. We have Mr. Girish Shah asking a question on, given that our foreign currency reserves at the highest level, why rupee remains so weak vis-a-vis US dollars in terms of value? It hasn't improved. So higher,
Yeah. So there are two reasons for that. One, what RBI has been saying that, which is also quite justifiable reason. So what happened after GFC was that strong flows came in. After GFC means global financial crisis, 2009-10 में, strong flows came in. We had a laissez-faire policy. उस समय के RBI ने, they didn't intervene in the market and let rupee appreciate. What happened after that? There was a taper tantrum. That money withdrew quickly, and we didn't have enough reserves, and we saw such a sharp pressure on our currency. The lessons were learned that if we have big liquidity-driven flows into an economy, they are liable to go back once the policy which have caused these flows reverses. So in a sense, EMs are in a way tied to what is happening in the DM economy. So while right now we have seen a strong inflows in the economy because global monetary policy has been exceptionally loose, once those policies gets tightened, we will see outflows coming. So it is prudent on the part of central banks across EM to have sufficient amount of reserves. That is one reason. So what RBI has been doing, so to answer the specific question why rupee didn't appreciate, because simply the quick answer is that RBI didn't let it appreciate. There was a massive mopping of dollars. So whenever there was excess dollar coming, RBI was buying the same. Whenever dollar was coming, so it was ensuring that the dollar inflow doesn't impact the currency system. So one reason is the safety purpose. Second reason, I would say more important, and which I don't think they will speak out publicly. I think currency policy has become a part of India's industrial policy. What I mean to say is that what China did, what East Asia did many decades ago, especially China, have low rates, high investment, and ensure that the currency remains competitive. So what the same thing RBI is doing, it is ensuring that at a time when you are trying to make India competitive, you are trying to attract foreign flows into India, you should also ensure that the currency remains competitive so that they find it cheaper to invest into India. That is the second reason why RBI is doing this. And there's no other reason why rupee had not appreciated. And if RBI was not in the picture, we would have seen significant appreciation of INR.
Right. Okay, good. I hope Mr. Girish got his answer. So we have this one question. In fact, I wanted to cover asset class views also. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time, but this question through this, at least you can answer equity one. Now, Mr. Amit Akshantal, he asked, what do you think still market overvalue with respect to P ratio? So a little bit on the equity market with all your views on macroeconomic.
So, I mean, we have been generally quite bullish on equity over the last few quarters. The key reason is that a whole theme of reflation trade and of growth uptake. So if we are seeing, so whenever you have this massive money printing, so as to say, massive liquidity, that typically results in that typically has a positive impact on things like equity and also real estate. So that is one reason. Whenever you have a growth uptake, whenever you have reflation, equities generally do benefit. That's one. And second thing, I mean, a lot of some people make this argument, and it has some merit, obviously, that it has gone up a lot, and P ratios have gone up a lot. But the real benchmark of whether equity is expensive or not is to benchmark it with what is the risk-free rate. So despite this strong pickup in Ps and despite the strong pickup in equity prices, if you look into the equity risk premium, which is the excess of equity returns over bond returns, they are still at a very high levels. So if you look into equity valuation purely based on what is the alternate asset class return, which is the risk-free rate, it is still pretty decently valued. I mean, having said that, there are some risks to equities. The rally has been pretty strong. And I would particularly be worried with what happens in the US with this new Biden administration. There are some talks about tax hikes and all. So there is some vulnerability. But I would say that given our growth outlook and our longer-term growth outlook, plus given the fact that both globally and domestically, central banks are committed to keep lower rates, I won't call them particularly highly overvalued.
Okay, thank you. And Soumya has asked one question, but I hope that is answered. That question on inflation, that you a very nice question, but I think Bhupesh has spent good time in terms of explaining his views on inflation. This is a very good question, and we'll take this will be the last one. Amey Joshi is asking, what strategy should investors keep in mind when investing in MF looking at current scenario? In which MF theme should invest for long return? I think long-term returns he means at a target return, at a target tenure of 1 to 3 years. Essentially for 1 to 3 years, what do you suggest investors do at this stage in terms of asset allocation and a few themes if you have in mind to benefit from this view?
If you are bullish on growth, if you are bullish on longer term growth and inflation trade, the best asset class would be equities. So I think we are still quite constructive on equities, and I think equity should get a fair deal of your allocation, and especially if you're a long-term investor. One thing. However, I mean, if you have a short-term time horizon, then some amount of allocation has to go towards bonds also. While our base case is that yields have bottomed out and likely to gradually move upwards, I think the yield curve is still quite steep and they're still pretty decent accrual returns. And we always have to benchmark these returns, but in the risk-free rate, which is the government policy, I mean, the RBI policy rate. And if you compare to that, I think even bonds still are giving decent returns. I think the best of capital gains are behind us. I don't see any major juice in the capital gain side, but accrual returns can still be pretty okay. So equities should have a big proportion of your investment, and for asset allocation risk management part, some allocation has to go to bonds, and looking for accrual returns and into strategies where you can get decent accrual returns.
Right. I think that's a very clear, I think, view that you have shared, actionable view rather. So last question from my side is on the monetary policy. So can you just share your quick views on what can one expect in February policy?
Yeah. So I mean, last 2 years, RBI has done a lot of heavy lifting. There have been aggressive rate cuts, massive liquidity infusion. They've had TLTROs. We have had CRR cuts. So a lot of work has already been done by RBI in terms of monetary policy. And I think incrementally, it is very unlikely that anything major will come for a further easing part. So I think this year will be more about some withdrawal of accommodation. If our view of growth turns out to be correct and we have a strong rebound, and if there is some concern about inflation, which are not a base case, but when at a time when money supply is going so fast and there's a growth rebound, for an economy like India, unlike in US and West, for an economy like India, where we have seen long years of inflation, the central bank may tend to get worried about inflation, which is pretty justified. So we believe that there will be some withdrawal of accommodation. We don't see any rate hike coming this year. It's very unlikely that we'll have any big rate move. But this extraordinary liquidity that we have, 6 trillion rupee per day in the banking, I mean, every night in the banking system, I think some steps will be taken to withdraw some part of it. There may be, I mean, maybe towards the end of the year, some steps may be taken to ensure that the repo reverse repo corridor, which has gone up significantly from 25 basis point to now 65 basis point, that is narrowed. So, but that is, I think, sometime later in the year. In the very near term, I think RBI will take cues to what government does in the budget. A base case is that nothing disruptive will happen in terms of rates. They will ensure that this withdrawal process remains gradual and non-disruptive for the market, and especially because the last inflation number has been quite benign. So they should take heart from that. But net, I think the best of monetary policy easing is behind us, and we should be ready for some gradual increase in rate, which we expect to be non-disruptive.
Okay. So thank you, Bhupesh, for very lucidly explaining, the macroeconomy, and also for sharing with some actionable insights. I think that's most important. Besides, of course, very knowledgeable and research-based views. So thank you very much for all of that. Thank you, viewers, for joining us in this today's session. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Bhupesh.
Thanks, Navdeep, and thanks for all the viewers.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.